I welcome all the participants here in the Helene Saal at WIFO. Online, I welcome participants from the Helene Saal here at WIFO. Our guest today, keynote speaker, is Bernhard Ganglmair. Bernhard is specialized on topics in industrial organization and also economics of law, as I noticed. One of his earliest steps in his career, he was a junior fellow at WIFO many years ago, I think more than 20 years ago. He has properly advanced in the meantime. He's now professor at the University of Mannheim and also an important expert at the ZDW Mannheim. And he's published in the American Economics Journal, Grand Journal of Economics, Journal of Industrial Economics, etc., etc. So just a teaser for anyone who wants to look up his CV or some of his related works. So I give the floor to him. The usual timeline is about half an hour for presentation, about half an hour for discussion. The floor is yours.
Perfect. Thanks. Thanks for the nice introduction. Thanks for having me. Thanks for being here today. This is joint work with Darius Lambrecht. He is about to graduate from the University of Trier, and Nicholas Cyril at the University of London Goldsmiths. This is a paper on innovation, and it's a paper on sanctions. I've done a lot of work on innovation. I haven't done much work on sanctions. If you've done a lot of work on sanctions, please correct me as I go and tell you how I view the world of sanctions. And I'd love to have deeper discussions about innovation and some of the assumptions we're making. Targeted sanctions, untargeted firms starts off with this observation that coming from the outside to this a little bit, is many sanctions are targeted, or modern sanctions often name a firm or many firms. Export control lists related to freezing of assets. There's a firm or an organization whose assets are frozen. Investment bans for individual firms. You're not allowed to invest in some foreign company. Procurement restrictions. Certain firms are not allowed in the US in federal procurement systems. They're often aimed at single named entities. That can be a person, it can be a company, it can be some organization. We have a list of sanctions or a sanctions registry that lists vessels and aircraft. Oil tankers are very often show up in sanctions lists very often. Vessels and aircraft are not going to play a role here in this paper. We're not trying to say anything about cooperation with a vessel or an aircraft. But sanctions often aim at individual entities or organizations. And here's an example. In 2019, Huawei was put on the Bureau of Industry and Security list. That their entity list. So it's Huawei's technologies and dozens of their affiliates. They were put on this list that is compiled by the US Department of Commerce, the Bureau of Industry and Security. It's the BIS entities list. That saw a surge in 2019. It was mainly Chinese companies that were put on the list. That being on the list means basically a restrictive access to US technology, software, high-tech components. If Huawei shows up, that restricts its access to US technology. Now, we start then off with this observation. Oh, look, here's a patent that Huawei filed in the mid-10s. It was granted in 2017. Huawei is one of the applicants. It's listed here in yellow, Huawei Technologies Limited, coming out of Shenzhen in China. In purple, we see Cisco. Cisco is a company based in the US. So Huawei is added to the BIS entity list. But what does this mean for US-based Cisco? That's what this paper is going to be about. We're interested in these indirect effects of sanctions and the indirect effects of sanctions on unsanctioned but exposed firms back home. This is it's going to be a very US-focused talk. We do have data for European firms as well, but we haven't tortured them enough yet. Things just don't play out the way we want. We can talk about that more in a little bit. So sanctions are targeted. Firms do not invent alone, but They often collaborate. They often patent together, often with rivals, suppliers, universities, and very often across borders, and very often, or sometimes, with sanctioned firms. So the policy reaches past the target. If you sanction a targeted firm, you might also hit an untargeted firm back home. So the penalty travels down the collaboration network to firms that no one ever named, for instance, on the BIS entities list. So what we ask in the paper is, when your R&D collaborator gets sanctioned, but you are not, what happens to your R&D? What are the indirect effects of targeted sanctions? And a lot of this paper will be driven by the kind of program designs that we're looking at. The program design of these sanctions matter for the results. There are different levels, there are different objectives of these instruments, there are different lists. The BIS entity list by the Bureau of Industry and Security is an exports control list. There's a list about asset freezes. The U.S. Office of Foreign and Asset Control has a long list of entities whose assets are frozen. A lot of the EU lists block assets by individual entities. There are procurement bars, the DoD's 1260H list that was just expanded a few weeks ago. It didn't really pop up in the news much, but the DoD added more Chinese-based companies to their list. Those effectively mean is they are now barred from federal contracting, from federal procurement contracting in the U.S. And then there are investment bans, and here are three examples of a Chinese military-industrial complex affected by that. So some of these sanctions are very technology-focused, some are a bit more asset-focused, and then we have sanctions that affect drug cartels and others, and they will eventually show up in our data, but they won't play a big role. I will come back to the program design at the end of my presentation, because then we can start looking at where are the effects that we show, where are they coming from, what kind of sanctions do drive our results. So let me give you a quick preview about what we're doing. So it's going to be an empirical paper, and our design is the following. We look at these exposed firms. We look at the Ciscos. They are exposed to a foreign sanctioned company. They have research collaborations or research ties with a sanctioned company and are therefore exposed to one of those sanctions. And we compare them to a matched placebo partner control group. We try to identify very similar focal region companies, US companies in that case, that also have research collaborations with another company in the same country, but that company was not sanctioned. So we're looking for firms similar to Cisco that have research collaborations with companies in China, but these companies are themselves not sanctioned. This is going to be our matched placebo partner control. We then use a stacked different setting, and we look at a resolve, and I explain more what we mean by that, by a resolve -2, -1 baseline. So that's really just the baseline with which we compare the estimated treatment effect. We look at sanctions across 30 years from 8 different jurisdictions. So we start off compiling a sanctions list of about 100,000 designated entities. And then we start breaking it down and matching it with data that we have. I'll walk us through the data construction here in a moment to eventually come to our relatively small sample of exposed. Our finding is the sanctioned tie is cut. Not a big surprise. Or at least that's our sanity check in the paper. If you are collaborating with a sanctioned company, but that tie will break with a 67% probability after the sanctions come in place. So Cisco here in our example, with a 67% chance, is going to stop patenting with Huawei because of Cisco being added to the sanction list. But the total patenting of our exposed firm increases. Cisco ends up patenting more than it would have had Huawei not been sanctioned. The severance, so breaking ties with Huawei, is replaced partly by Cisco finding new foreign collaborators, not domestic, but foreign collaborators, but it's mostly by solo invention. Cisco just does a lot more solo R&D or solo patent applications. Breaks ties with the sanctioned company and responds to that by more and more solo innovation. The lesson that we try to take away from the paper, from this project, is it's targeted sanctions reach past their target, the cost falls in part on the firms that no one ever named in these sanctions lists. So it's, again, the indirect effect at home. All right, so let me walk us through the data. I talk a little bit about our empirical approach, the main results, and if time permits, probably part of the discussion, I have some robustness and sanity checks and some validity checks for causal identification. The usual referee 2 comment. So we try to preempt what referee 2 is going to tell us. And there are some obvious ones and maybe not so obvious ones. So building the data, it's in 4 steps. We first build a sanctions registry. We assembled sanctioned entities across 8 jurisdictions. In the end, the only one that matters are sanctions that come down from the United States, but we use the others to clean our control group a little bit. Second, we match the entities that are listed, about this 100,000 entities that are listed in the sanctions, we match them to patent records. So then we link the sanctioned entities to applicants in worldwide patent records. We want to know who among the sanctioned entities is actually research active. Research active here, we measure by you file a patent application somewhere in the world. We use PatStat for that, which is a nicely comprehensive patent database. Then we find the sanctioned entities collaborators. So we look at Huawei. Huawei would have been linked to a patent. We found that patent. And then we look at all of Huawei's collaborators. So we find Cisco. We identify all the unsanctioned firms that co-applied with our sanctioned entities. And then we take a subsample of that, because today I will only look at US firms. So I only look at the US-based Cisco and other companies in the US. And then for these companies and our control samples, we build outcomes. We construct firm year measures of collaboration, innovation, the direction of innovation, the quality of innovation. All right, step by step. So we built this cross-jurisdictional registry. We go from primary sources, official bulk lists from each of the authorities. They come in various data formats. We went into the Wayback Machine to get some earlier records. We backfilled designation dates. So if we were to download from the BIS, the Bureau of Industry and Security, their current list, the consolidated list they offer, we get a snapshot of what sanctions are currently active. But we need to go back into history. The problem with patent data, and eventually we look at innovation using patent data. If you get the current snapshot, patent data isn't really going to help you much. Patents don't show up in the patent system until a couple years after they're filed. They won't be granted for a few more years. It takes a while for firms to change their R&D behavior. It takes a while for firms to change their patenting behavior. So anything that we know about current sanctions is not going to be as useful. That's why we want to backfill all these dates and go back into history as far as we can. We end up going back to 1995 as our earliest sanctions. So we backfill the designation dates going through a couple of sources, and then we harmonize names. So we harmonize and deduplicate names across different regimes. Huawei might as well show up on a European list, on a US list, on a different US list. And we want to know which company is designated multiple times on multiple lists. For that, we use open sanctions that helps us with the duplication and harmonization of the data. And here's just a quick breakdown. Overall, how many sanctioned entities are in the very original list? And about half of those are sanctioned by US programs. Now, about a fifth are sanctioned by European Union programs. United Kingdom has a good number of sanctions. And then we look at other jurisdictions that have meaningful number of sanctioned lists and sanctioned entities. In the end, what will drive the results are United States sanctions only. The Europeans don't bite for the matching that we're going to do in the second step. In the second step, I want to show us these sanctions don't show up all at the same time, but they're added over time to our registry. The registry starts in 1990, very little going on. We start seeing firms being added in 1995. It's sort of a nice development over time, accelerating in the most recent years, and that's going to be important later on a little bit. All right. What we do is we drop individuals, we drop vessels, we drop aircrafts. We can't match an aircraft with the patent database. We can't match vessel with the patent database. We're not interested in individual applicants, but we're interested in firm level behavior. Yes?
Are there also removals of firms from the sanction list?
Yes. So we do have the designations, and we do know when the firms are taken off. Right now we don't turn off the treatment. So what we do is you're linked to a sanctioned firm. Your treatment as the exposed firm, as Cisco, is turned on. If that linked sanctioned firm is eventually, years later, taking off the list, we don't change Cisco's treatment status simply because we only look at the first 5 years after you become exposed. And we don't have a large number of lists taken off the list within that 5-year window. So within that 5-year window that we're looking at in our estimations, sanctioned entities are not taken off the list. But yes, they're taken off. As much as we can tell, we collect that information as well. And I think there's a bit more variation that we can exploit. There's variation at least at the sanctioned firms level, but once we go into the exposed firms level, and you'll see in a moment, it's a relatively small number. I don't think that variation is going to help us much. But yes, the answer is yes, we collected. We are currently not making good use of it, or no use of it. All right, so our second step is we then match to patent records. We take the names of the sanctioned entities on the list, and then we match it to worldwide patent applicants. We go through some cleaning steps, and then we go through multiple matching steps. We do exact matching, we do fuzzy matching. The unit of analysis that we're eventually interested in is what's called the patent personal standardized number. I think, or personalized standardized name, PSN. What that means is some companies might file patents in PatStat under different names. There's this example of the Sony Corporation in the US patent system, and at the USPTO shows up with like 30 different name versions. IBM shows up with 50, 60 different name versions. PatStat does a harmonization for us and combines them all under a unique identifier. But the unique identifier is relatively granular. What that also means is that we have an international, multinational group. The group's national arms count as separate organizations. So Huawei Germany would be separate from Huawei USA, would be separate from Huawei China. Cisco Germany would be separate from Cisco USA if PatStat says this is a different PSN. So we take their harmonization and their level of the unit of analysis as our unit of analysis. There is a final one where we just take it by raw name. That's too granular. We're double counting a lot. And there's another level that combines all the Huawei's to one big parent company. We think that's too coarse. So we try to stay middle ground here. All right. Our match coverage rate is about 7.3%. Out of all the companies that we think are matchable, no individuals, no vessels, no aircraft, just organizations, we can match to PatStat about 7.3% of those. We've done a good amount of work in cleaning and pre-processing the names and really trying hard to match them to the patent records. We think that's a pretty accurate number. Is it going to be the best number we will ever get? No. But out of the sanctioned entities, and mind you, these are not necessarily technology targeted sanctions. These are across the board sanctions where some name shows up. 7.3 showing up in PatStat means 7.3 or 1 out of 12 of the sanctioned entities is research active at least once because they show up on a patent once. All right. This is the number of these matched firms over time. Again, we see a nice development and a huge acceleration in the last few years. Blue are those firms that are sanctioned by by European sanctions, and orange are the US sanctions, and they make up most of what we see in the data. All right, third step. Now we find the collaborator. Now we go look for the Cisco. So a co-applicant here is that two parties are on the same patent and their research. Then if they are on the same patent, they're research collaborators. And we define exposure in the following way. A focal firm is exposed when a past co-applicant is later sanctioned. Cisco will be exposed because it has a patent with Huawei. Huawei will later be sanctioned. So now Cisco is a treated firm for the purpose of this analysis. It is exposed to the sanction because it has an active collaboration with Huawei. We look at joint patent applications within a -10 to -1 window. If that collaboration is 30 years old, that's not an ongoing collaboration. If that collaboration is very, very recent, we want to try and weed out anticipation effects. We also don't count for very, very recent, like a week before the sanction. So we look at -10 to -1 year for that look back. The focal firms now are in the data we collected for US firms that are exposed and then European firms that are exposed. The results I have today are US firms only. All right. The green column here, those are the exposed firms by the sanction list. Most of our firms in the data are exposed through the BIS entity list, through export bans. Some are exposed through these are asset freeze. These are non-investment bans and a couple of other programs. The European sanctions. So these are all of the lists that trigger an exposed firms. That trigger an exposed firm either in the US or in Europe. The European sanction programs do not patent expose any US or European firms. The US sanctions are about 20% of all sanctioned entities in our entire registry come from European sanctions. They're different. They don't address innovators, they don't address R&D, or they address firms that never patent with US or European firms. In fact, these are the main European sanction programs. Yes, we do match a lot of them to patent data. So the European sanction program do target inventors in PatStat, but none of these 266 inventors collaborate with any US or European firm. So the results that we have are entirely driven by US sanctions and not by European sanctions. And here is one picture that's going to come back. This is the cumulative number of exposed firms over time from 1995 to 2025. We see a little bit of additions. So the green line here is the United States by its own jurisdiction. Those are US sanctions. We see some additions over time, but the biggest addition is 2019. This is the surge in the BIS entity list. Most of the exposed firms that we have in the data that we analyze come through additions of their sanction partners around 2019, and then there's a little bit after that. Most of these companies were then exposed because their research collaborators are Chinese companies added to the BIS entity list in 2019. We'll take care of that. Somehow we'll run some heterogeneity and robustness analysis, taking 2019 out and only looking at the pre-2018 window. The results follow through, but we lose a lot of observations, so we get a lot of noise in our estimates. The point estimates work through or go through, but our results are just a lot noisier. So keep that in mind that most of the identification, if you want this to be flat and the top to be flat, most of the identification is a 2019 event. You can think of it as a diff and diff. Before that, nobody was exposed. In 2019, almost everyone was exposed. That will help with the identification, but we also make use of that staggered adoption over time. We do build these cohorts. Every time a firm's exposed, we do build a cohort around it. Okay, the fourth step, we now calculate outcome variables. We look at the severance. Do exposed firms drop their sanction co-applicants? We look at volume, the total patent application, the total patent applicant collaborations. We look at collaborations. So is there co-applications with the partner country? Are there co-applications with domestic partners? Are there co-applications with other foreign partners? So we want to understand how the cooperation patterns of our exposed firms change country-wise. And then we look at the direction and quality of our exposed firms' patents. Do they shift technology? Do they try and steer away from their earlier technology focus with the sanction firms and try out something new? And we look at the impact and quality of their application. So these are going to be our outcome variables. Just collaboration, volume of innovation as we measure it with patents, and the quality of that innovation. All right, just a summary table. We can come back to that. What's my empirical strategy? We have a staggered treatment. Exposed firms being added between 1995 and 2025. That's our last year, with a high concentration in 2019. So what we do is we construct a matched control group, and then we run a stacked difference in differences analysis on a -5 to -5 to +5 year window. So we look at our exposed firms and their control firms 5 years before with 5 years after. We also show some event study pictures to look at pre-trends, and yes, referee 2 will be partially right. And we also run a pre-2019 robustness version, taking this out. just look at that staggered adoption with a relatively small number of firms, exposed firms, without the 2019 to see does 2019 drive the results. All right. So I've said a few things about treatment. Exposure is through the sanction partner. The focal firm is a patent applicant to a firm that's never itself exposed. The treatment is you at least one of its past co-applicants is later sanctioned. So Cisco is exposed because Huawei gets sanctioned later. And the treatment date is the year the partner is first sanctioned. The treatment here is indirect. You're not treated directly because you're not named as an entity on the sanction list, but you're treated through the collaboration with the sanctioned entity. We match. For the pool of that matching, we use all never exposed firms that are themselves active. They have foreign collaborators. So that means you must have at least one foreign collaborator in a 10-year window, and you must not be sanctioned by any of our 8 jurisdictions. So an unsanctioned, an unexposed company that's also active in the same country as the exposed company. We match exact on a number of things, and we do some nearest on 2 other margins. We find the 5 nearest neighbors per treatment. We match that with replacement. Okay. Why do we need a placebo partner? We want a placebo partner control here with a firm with the same in and out collaboration. So moving up in collaboration numbers and then coming back down, that profile. So looking at these firms whose partner was also never sanctioned, differences out the ordinary life cycle. So if we match on similar firms with similar pre-treatment trajectories in collaboration, that helps us to just difference out the ordinary collaboration life cycle where firms start collaborating more and then that veers off. That's why we look at these placebo partners. Okay, estimation is a stack differentiative. We use fixed effects specifications. For size outcomes, we use logs. For robustness, we also look at what the referee 2 would tell us to look at, some Poisson models or hyperbolic, inverse hyperbolic sine models. And for the event study window, we look at the -5 +1. I'll talk about the clean baseline in the Q&A. Okay, results. I have a few minutes. Do the sanctions work? Do exposed firms break up? And here's the treatment effect for the partner sanctioned. We look at 2 different outcome variables. Do you have any applications with the sanction partner? And what's the number of applications with the sanction partner? Both of here in levels, we don't log the second year. And we see a decrease in collaboration anywhere between 63% and 67%. So the sanctions hits the linked or the US firms as well. Huawei gets sanctioned. Cisco responds by breaking ties in 67% of the cases. Yes.
So, and the matching process, is it the case that you have Huawei cooperating with, let's say, 500 different US companies? In the observation count, for example?
So 520, Huawei is not the source of the exposure for all 520. Huawei is the source of the exposure for some of them.
Yeah.
What we currently cluster, we cluster on firms. So on the exposed firms and the control firms. We have also clustered on the sanctioned entity. Doesn't seem to drive the results much. The problem with that, though, is Huawei does take a chunk of the sanctions. So the number of clusters gets down, but it doesn't break the results per se. But I think that matters for clustering. Right? 200 or 100 companies exposed because of Huawei, there's something about them that correlates the area. So that we try to take care of that in clustering. Right now, these results are just firm clustering and not sanctioned firm clustering. But we've tried that out. Doesn't seem to be driving.
One question: if the same US firm is once cooperating with one sanctioned firm that was sanctioned at a particular point in time, and then they also cooperating with another firm's sanctioned at a different point in time, would it come up in your setup as 2 different firms?
No, it shows up only as one exposed firm, and the treatment date is the time the first sanction partner is added. So we don't add on another sanction. Like you're sanctioned because of Huawei, and Baidu was added just 2 weeks ago, and Cisco might be sanctioned again. We don't have that. Okay. Just like we don't expect to have a lot of firms. That's something to look into. We don't think our exposed number of firms is gonna is going to be driven by sanctioned parties being dropped off the list as well. So this is sort of, that's the opposite picture. Do we have a second treatment? So do we have a treatment variable from 1 to 2, and do we turn off the treatment from 1 to 0? We don't do either of those. The numbers are so small, we don't expect that. We haven't looked into it in great detail. We know it happens, but I don't think it will drive results. It's something to look into. So sanctions work. Focal firms partially drop their sanctioned partners. That's a sanity check. Exposed parties are affected by the sanctions. This is really just to show that what the entire story we're trying to tell kind of makes sense. There is this indirect effect. Okay, what happens to exposed firms' innovation? Volume goes up. So what we do look at now at the outcome variable is the number of applications by our exposed firms. And again, we always compare it to our placebo partner control. The number of patent applications this exposed firm files at an annual level, and the number of collaboration links. This is not the same as the number of collaborators. That's data we're currently collecting, but it's the number of collaboration links. It's the collaborator patent application combination. Both go up. Our exposed firms, those that sever the links with the sanctioned companies, start patenting more, goes up by about 18%. Our collaboration links go up by about 10%. So Cisco loses Huawei, or drops Huawei, and starts patenting more. And the same is true for, focal firms patent more. Focal firms also improve the quality, partially, of their patents. 3 variables here. The first is technological shift. We look at the patent portfolio of the exposed at an annual level, and then compare it over time. We use a distance measure here, and then just try to see, does the patent portfolio change over time? A changing patent portfolio measured in terms of patent classification, a change in the patent portfolio would suggest that that exposed firm starts changing its technological trajectory. Our exposed firms change that. The distance measure, I don't know how to interpret that. It changes by about 16%. I can't really give you an economic intuition what that 16% is. Originality, I'm going to skip here. Look at forward citations. Forward citations in the innovation literature is very often used as a measure for quality of a patent, the impact of a patent. A forward citation means another patent applicant is citing your patent. And the more often you're cited, well, just like we collect patent paper citations, the more you're cited, the more you're seen, the more impactful your paper is. Patent citations of the exposed firms go up after they sever links with their sanctioned parties. Cisco gets more patent citations from the patents that it files after the severance or after the sanctions. So focal firms explore new technologies, they file better patents. We don't have good answers why that's the case. This is going to be one of the big next steps. I can talk a little bit about more patenting, about how exactly, where's the more patenting coming from? So what we do now is we look at the within firm decomposition of these patent applications. I want to know the patent applications that our Cisco files. Where do these new patent applications go? So what we do is we essentially run a triple diff. And we find that breaking things down by partner country. Partner country will be China. So Huawei is sanctioned, so the partner country is China. Elsewhere, it's just elsewhere. The sanctioned party, well, those applications drop, right? We saw that. Applications with firms in the same country as the sanctioned partner, but with firms that are not sanctioned, don't change at all. Cisco keeps patenting with Chinese companies that are not sanctioned. But Cisco starts looking for other country collaborators. It's an increase of about one application per year. But most importantly, Cisco starts filing solo patents. Just doesn't file with collaborators. In 6 applications per year, increase in 14%. So the firms patent more, mostly on their own, and partly by rerouting to new foreign partners, but not the sanctioned partners. So they are not leaving China. Cisco doesn't decide China's bad. They stay in China, continue partnering with Chinese firms, but they're reroutes to other international collaborators. All right, these are the event study pictures for these triple diff pictures. I find them reassuring. There's a lot in there. Some things work out, some things don't work out. Reference 2 is going to have complaints about it. But what we see is these are own partner country. These are international collaborators and own sanctions. So just reflect what we just saw on the table. Okay. Then we look a little bit at the heterogeneity, and then I'm going to wrap up. Where does the effect come from? So where does the severance come from? Where does the overall increase in patent applications come from? About that 18% increase in overall patent applications. Where's it coming from? It comes from export control instruments. It comes from the BIS entity list because most of our data is the BIS entity list, but also technology sector targeting in the entities list. About 22%. That means other sanctions lists, like asset freezing lists, would have a weaker effect. What drives the results is export controls and technology focusing. If there's no effect on non-tech slices, asset freezing, economic statecraft, you just try and sanction countries because you want to have because of geopolitical policy. And Russia doesn't drive results either, so this is not a Russia story. Innovation gets greener. We look at patents that we can classify as climate technologies or climate abatement technologies. Green technology, the share of the firm's portfolio rises by, here's 2.3 percentage points. They start at a small base, it increases by 64%. So our exposed firms, as they file more and more patent, their patents get greener relative to the placebo control group. So this is not a secular trend in more green technology, but this still comes out of the stacked diff and diff. These are effects relative to the stacked control group. This is a US only result. We do look at European data already. I don't have anything here, but the effect doesn't seem to be coming out of Europe at all. European innovation by exposed firms does not become greener. This is US. Yes, good question.
Sorry, so I'm still hung up on the increase in innovation. Are we saying that the firm is better off after it's delinked from the collaborator, saying that pre-delinking was kind of suboptimal, was not ideal from innovation volume perspective? Is that what we are kind of?
That's one interpretation. I wouldn't want to go that far. Because that seems to suggest that Cisco just didn't figure it out and then it needed a sanction to tell them, look, doing business with Huawei is bad. Maybe we need to shock you a little bit to show you that you're better off going somewhere else. There could be a strategic response by, and I say Cisco, but it's the 509 other firms. There could be a strategic response happening that these firms should start patenting more. Put the quality results aside for a moment. We just patent more because we want to stay ahead of the curve. Other firms are being cut from Huawei. Now we start patenting on our own more because we want to stay ahead of the technology curve. Huawei isn't going to stop doing R&D. They will keep patenting. They might not patent in the US Patent Office, although they still do. It's been going down, but they still will develop. Cisco might realize we can't do it together anymore, so I have less control or influence over what Huawei is doing. I have less insights, so maybe I need to strategically start doing more. If it weren't for the quality result, I would say they just churn out patent applications left and right that don't really mean much. But we also see an increase in the citations of these patents. Now, if everybody who is exposed in the US starts just churning out patents and they start citing each other, forward citations go up mechanically through that, and it has little to do with the underlying technology actually being better. And that, I think, is supported a tiny little bit by, let's go back to this one measure I didn't talk about, originality. Originality means how, in a way, original. How broad is the technology base that you build your patent on? How many different technologies do you use to construct something new? higher originality typically means you use more on a broader base to recombine things and do something brand new nobody's ever thought of. If you just cite patents from your own technology, you're doing the same we've been doing over years. Taking insights from other technologies from other sectors, that shows originality, and that's sort of a value measure as well. We don't see that here. So maybe what Cisco starts doing is, yeah, they may go in a different direction, and they start churning out more papers that everybody else, if everybody else does that, they start citing each other. Not necessarily better. When I say they file better patents, it's this limitation to they're citing more. They're not more, they're less breakthrough-y, they're just more visible maybe. So kicking Cisco to break out of their habits could be one explanation. I don't yet buy the story that Cisco is better off after the sanctions, but we don't know yet. I think this is something to dig into a lot. Okay, they get greener? Yes, China matters. Chinese partners, if you're exposed because of a Chinese partner, the effect is 21% relative to 18, that's not huge. If I'm exposed because of the 2019 entities list, that's a heterogeneity effect of 20% relative to 18 for everything. Yes, it's a little bit of China, a little bit of 2019, but it's not the driving force. One last thing, yeah, referees want to see a lot of things. We haven't seen the referees yet, but preemptively, is it 2019? Is it China? We have these pictures. Most of the exposed firms are exposed because of 2019. What if we drop 2019 and ongoing? What if we just look at everything before the surge in the entity list, in the BIS entity list, before a lot of Chinese firms were added as the link for our exposed firms? 2019, almost all the firms responsible for the exposure were Chinese firms. If I cut the sample 2018 and I find the same results, I know it's not China. This is and then we go from 520 treated firms to 84. So we're really cutting the sample down. We're gonna get a lot of noise. This is do you have any sanctions with your co-applicant? Do you have any applications with the sanctioned co-applicant? This is the 0-1 severance. Do you drop the co-applicant? Same result, just very noisy. All the other outcome variables, they point in the same direction. They just get a lot noisier. We take that as sort of evidence for China matters, the 2019 year, the surge matters. But if we were in 2018 right now, we were to look at the data up to 2018, we get the same result. It's just very noisy because with 84 treated observations, you can't do much. All right, we look at pre-trends, event studies. Let's wrap up. When your co-inventor is sanctioned and you are not, what happens to your innovation? That's what we're asking. A design is we look at exposed firms in a match control sample. We look at, we apply a stack difference and difference analysis across about 30 years of sanctions. We find the sanction tie is cut. Severance is replaced partly by new foreign collaborators, but mostly by firms starting solo patenting, and export controls and technology targeting drive the results. Innovation gets a little greener. Targeted sanctions reach past their target. The cost falls in some part on the firms that are actually not meant to be targeted by these sanctions. What's next? We want to know why, and we want to know how exactly. So that volume result is puzzling. The quality result is puzzling. This is where we need to dig in. There's something about European firms that are exposed. They're so different from anybody that we could potentially match them with, that the causal identification of the European results just doesn't follow through. The treated sample is so different from the control sample that we are not super happy presenting these at this point. Instrument objectives, we've done a little work on that. And technological reorientation, what does this mean? Is this only for the solo patents? Is this a story of deliberate decoupling from China? Does that come with benefits, that we get away from sanctioned technologies, the old ways we've always done, toward more technology sovereignty? All right, thank you.
Thank you for this very, very interesting research you presented. So, yes, Heide, you're the first.
Thank you for the presentation. It's super interesting. I have a bit of a question of the nitty-gritty part about the data. So you said you 100%, 100K observations, 50% are from the US, and these are coming from GIS and factors. And you cross-checked that with open sanctions, right? And why did you do that? So because you scraped the data yourself, so what was that step about?
We wanted to know, are there some lists that we missed? Are there, for those that we scraped, is there something in open sanctions that we missed? And we use the open sanctions identifier and their harmonization that helps us harmonize and deduplicate the names a little bit. The problem with open sanctions, it's a beautiful project, but it's a snapshot. And I think it starts in 2022, 2023. It gives us 2-3 years. But for patent work, that doesn't help because what's in the PatStat database for 2023 can't really be relied on anyway. So think about it. No, I'm shocked. I need to change my R&D strategy. I change my R&D strategy. Somehow that has to trickle down to my patent applications. Then I file a patent application with the patent office. The patent office and the EPO and the US keeps that a secret for 18 months. It never shows up in any database. And then it starts showing up. That's when we count it. If I wanted to boil it down to or limit my attention to patents that are actually granted, I have to wait another 2, 3, or 4 years for that to actually happen. Anything that's a current snapshot for this approach doesn't work. It works for a lot of other approaches, just not this. This is why we tried to go back in history as far as we could, and open sanctions didn't help, except for harmonization and just making sure we don't miss any lists. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, thank you, Bernhard. 2 questions. First is, do we have any theoretical frameworks that could help us out here? I mean, I'm not in this literature, but if we take sanctions at the country level, no, we hit one partner, then we see that link is severed or disrupted or reduced, and then we see trade diversion, and most of the trade diversion happens within the country. Right, so that's so what you find that own patenting goes up is probably very natural. Even if you might, work more with some other partners, but most of the patenting is happening in your own company. So that the biggest reaction, so that would be from a trade network perspective, would be the natural outcome.
So you bring it in a way. You bring it home.
Yeah, that's good. And the second question that I have is. Do we understand right that when you construct your control group, this is a doppelganger of Huawei in China? And I'm not concerned. I mean, in the sanctions literature, there's a lot of discussion about threats. There's even the TIS database. There's fundamentally about threats. And threats play an important role. So is it not, if Huawei is sanctioned, that you might expect as a US company that the twin of Huawei could also be sanctioned at any time? And would that not? So is your control clean enough? That's my question, I guess.
I don't have a good answer to the first. The management literature has theories about absorptive capacity, and you lose an innovation or R&D collaborator. How do you replace that? That's a slicing of the data we have tried to look into. If your sanctioned collaborator takes up a big chunk of your patent portfolio, the collaboration, the loss is a lot bigger. Compared to, well, Cisco only had one patent application that shouldn't hurt Cisco as much. So we're thinking of, one of our co-authors comes out of the management literature. They know a lot about these questions of absorptive capacity replacement. That's the way we're thinking in terms of the theoretical contribution or the theoretical angle. We're not there yet, so I don't have a good answer. The second, is the control clean enough? The honest answer is no. For the reason that to have the twin, or to have these 5 twins, we were also worried about, we want to have the same pre-treatment trajectories, sort of in collaboration trajectories. So we control for that as well, that enters the matching. So that's one. The same country comes out of sort of this idea, well, we want the twins to be as simple or as similar as possible. So the first approach was to look at the same country sanction. We haven't tried it with other countries. I would have to think about, look, I'm trying, I have my exposed firms exposed by China. Do I drop the country matching, or do I rule out any placebo controls that have collaborations in China and explicitly say, look, my controlled firm cannot have a collaborator in China, but it has to be outside of China to avoid the threat effect. In a way, to avoid the 2019 surge. If Huawei gets sanctioned, hundreds of others were sanctioned. What's not to say that 3 months later, a year later, 2 years later, we're adding more Chinese companies. It happened. So a lot more Chinese companies were added in the years to come. In that sense, if that's a concern, then no, the treatment control group is not clean. And I think that's something we could try and look into. One thing we do see though, and maybe that's mechanical then by the way we constructed, but our Ciscos don't change their patenting behavior after the treatment, at least with the unsanctioned partner country companies. So the patenting volume with other Chinese companies doesn't change. I think if the threat were concern, I would see less patenting within China or within the partner country as well, because then the Ciscos are trying to shy away from patenting with. It could be mechanical simply because that's how we construct the control group, and that's why it doesn't show up. So I think it's worthwhile. It's definitely worthwhile thinking a little bit more.
Are there any further questions here on the floor? Jürgen?
Yeah, thank you for the paper. Two questions. One also similar to Gabriel is I would expect so that the quantity of patents goes up, maybe because the firm have to do more own efforts, but that the quality goes up as well is quite puzzling, really, because you'd expect the best teams of both firms to work together and collaboration to increase the quality of your invention. So that's really quite puzzling, and maybe it has really to do with and the difficulty. I mean, you know, this concept of the superstar firms, and Huawei is certainly, I mean, very unique in what it can do in terms of its competencies. So maybe that's something you can look at closely in the controls as well. My second question would be, you said at the end that, okay, if you sanction a firm, the cost also falls on someone else, but have you looked at the costs, for example, of R&D costs going up at Cisco, or is there any measure by which we can sort of quantify this lesson in some way or another?
No, but I think that's brilliant. I think that's a point well taken in the sense that number of exposed firms relatively small. We have a match sample overall. I think it's 2,500 firms. It's US firm can try and match it with publicly traded companies. That's easy data access. We could try and look into CompuStat, match it with firm level accounting information and see what R&D expenditures are. So I think that's one approach to take that. I think we want to do that. We would also get more firm level information. Right now, the only thing we could try and get firm size is by how many patents does the firm file. That as a very, very bad proxy for firm size. Matching it with an outside database for firm level information is going to do for a richer analysis. Yeah.
We have one more question from online, Agnes.
Hi, everybody. So thanks a lot for the really interesting presentation. I really enjoyed it because I'm working on a similar topic together with colleagues, but not with sanctions, but with patent litigations. And my questions, I have two exactly, also relate to the database you use and how you handle the data, which in turn will affect the way you treat cooperating firms, at least in my point of view. And my question is, how do you handle patent transactions between firms over time? And in particular, how do you handle strategic patent transaction within corporate groups?
Thanks for the question. Very, very short answer. No, we don't. And right now, I don't know how. I know patent transactions are a big deal. Reassignments, the US Patent Office has a very nice database and good information on the reassignment of patents, so we could dig into that. Our patent application counts go beyond just the US Patent Office. We could focus on the US Patent Office and just use their data, given that it's US firms, they all will file in the US, so we might limit our sample to that and then look at the reassignments, but especially within holding companies, maybe from parent companies to subsidiaries, to see if there is something that either drives results or helps us explain that. We haven't done it, but it's a great idea.
Thank you, Agnes. I would also add one simple explanation, or want to know what you think about it. If I think of an exogenous shock to a collaboration, so it was an unanticipated discontinuation of a research collaboration, could it be the case that probably both sides could then rush to protect the intellectual property by rushing to apply the patents, because otherwise it was shared knowledge which could have been strategically postponed, not to reveal too early. But once the collaboration breaks up, ideally both sides would then rush to safeguard what they have brought into the collaboration.
So it becomes a patent race. I think that was going in this direction. We did look at, I like this, we looked at, just out of curiosity, patenting by sanctioned firms. And there is a paper that we saw at a conference, co-author Nicola saw it at a conference last week. They looked at China decoupling. They looked at the patenting of the Chinese firms that were sanctioned. Small sample, because these are just the limitations. Propensity score matching, tried everything they could to make this causal. They find an increase in the patenting of the sanctioned company. We looked at our data just to see what do the companies, impacts that do that we are able to match. We matched a roughly similar number of Chinese firms. That was very reassuring. The problem that we saw initially an increase in patenting by the Chinese companies as well, and then it drops off, and that's just a patent database issue. I think one explanation for that is the patent race. We were torn apart. There's something there, or 2 out of 3 cases were torn apart. There's something there. Now we race to the patent office. The effects that we see for the exposed firms is more permanent. That would explain a very sort of transient effect, but not a permanent effect. Ours seems to be longer lasting. Still doesn't mean that it's not a patenting effect. The effect on the Chinese, and I think that was the takeaway of that other paper, is more money gets pumped into R&D on the Chinese side. And that could explain, it's not the sanction that explains the surge in patenting, but it's just that there's a lot more investment now going into the local, the domestic companies, and that might explain the surge in
So
patenting.
that the one possible explanation would imply more temporary effect.
Yeah.
Now, if you speak of more persistent effects, another hypothesis could be that the sanctioning bodies know something more that you can know from the patent data. The sense that the sanction is not, they actually is affected because they know that with Huawei and the cooperation with Cisco, there's a danger of some particularly high potential technology getting leaked out to China. And for some collaborations that look the same in your patent data, the sanction body, which might be very well informed, I don't know, would not be concerned that much. So that you would have an identification problem, of course, that relates
Right.
to the control group.
Yeah, so we match on very coarse technology. I think we can do a little bit more, but we wouldn't get as far as saying, well, we're sort of within a technology class those can be very fine grained, but within a technology class, the sanctioning body might know, oh, they do something that's relevant for national security, but they don't, and that's why I sanctioned them and not them. We try to match on technology, but it's coarse because the cells get really empty. If we go too narrow or too granular in the technology matching, we just lose a lot of matches. But that's an interesting point. That I think that would explain a more permanent effect.
Do you have any
One final question. Yeah.
Do you have any measure what firms lose by a broken collaboration? Because you have developed a rather cheap innovation policy. Just sanction foreign collaborations, and then you make your home firms more innovative by filing more patents. That's the cheapest innovation policy I know.
I know a paper is so much easier to sell if you just make an argument that
And it's so much easier to criticize than to write.
that too. But if our quality measures had gone down and the patent counts had gone down, or if the quality measures all go down, patent counts go up. They patent more, patent races, but all that is just nonsense. So they patent things that don't really matter much. Putting a euro, a dollar value on it, we can't. I think we can get to it indirectly if we believe more patents means more money, or it just means more technological progress, sort of on the home front. Then it's a good policy. Then it becomes an innovation policy. I wouldn't want to go as far as to say, oh, just sanction lots of companies because it's good for your own technology base. Although that's not so far-fetched to think if I force Cisco to decouple from Huawei or decouple from the technology leaders abroad, I kind of force them to start doing things on their own. Like in a global sense or overall welfare sense, that might not be a good policy, but for domestic policy, this is not so far-fetched.
The important point is if you cut them from the technological frontier. So maybe you have to measure the forward citation of the patents that were filed because of the breakup of the collaboration. So then these are really valuable patents and not just patents.
Yeah.
I think we can leave that as a final thought. It's okay for you, or you want?
I'm good, unless somebody wants to see referee 2 comments. No.
Next time.
Thanks a lot. This was great food for thought.